Well, hey everyone, welcome into the Pressing On podcast. I'm your host, Richie Reeder, and I have the honor of leading our organization in serving hospitalized families. One of the many ways that we serve hospitalized families is through this podcast, so thanks for listening, sharing, and subscribing. Our goal here with the Pressing On podcast is to amplify voices of perseverance and highlight the journey of hospitalized families so that everyone who listens will be encouraged to press on through tough times holistically. You can learn more about my family's hospital journey and transplant story, as well as take advantage of all of our free resources and Pressing On programs on our website at pressingon.org. For the latest Pressing On news, volunteer opportunities, and program information, be sure to subscribe to our email newsletter at pressingon.org. And follow along on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube to stay up to date on our journey as we serve hospitalized families. Just search for Pressing On PGH on most social platforms. Well, today you're in for a treat as we welcome my friend Katherine Sikma Wadsworth into the Pressing On podcast for episode 10. Katherine is a leadership coach, organizational development consultant, and host of the You Gotta Try This podcast, where she shares things that bring connection, beauty, and delight. She's a graduate of Calvin University, where she studied communication, psychology, and gender, and she holds master's degrees in higher education and leadership from Geneva College and Duquesne University. Katherine serves on the teaching team at Christ Community Church of the South Hills and is passionate about empowering others and helping them to understand their place in God's kingdom. She lives in Mount Lebanon, PA, just south of Pittsburgh, with her husband, David. Here in episode 10, Katherine vulnerably shares her journey of battling breast cancer. This is a timely topic here in October, considering it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and Katherine shares her entire journey of diagnosis, long grueling hours of chemo, a double mastectomy, and reconstructive surgery. We cover topics like what it feels like to hear the word cancer in your mid-30s, how she befriended her body during this time, and how friends and family can hold space for you in a helpful way while you battle cancer. This is one of my favorite conversations yet, and I know you're going to find Katherine's words encouraging. Let's dive in. Well, hey everyone, welcome back into the Pressing On podcast. Today it's my honor and privilege to have Katherine Sikma Wadsworth, a dear friend of mine. Katherine is a leadership coach, organizational development consultant, and host of the You Gotta Try This podcast, where she shares things that bring connection, beauty, and delight. Katherine, thanks for joining the Pressing On podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
It's a joy to be with you, and I think one of the things that sticks out to me about you is that anytime that I'm around you or sitting under your teaching or what, you have such a calming presence.
Aw,
And
thanks.
it's one of those things that as I got to know you and learn a little bit about your story of perseverance in healthcare and stuff like that, I was like, man, I'd love for our audience and all the people that Pressing On influences to be able to hear from you, because I think that you have a unique perspective. So thanks for being willing to share with us today.
Absolutely. It's an honor.
Well, let's start by getting to know you personally as a leader, as a woman. What are some things about you that you think that would be important for listeners to know as we get started?
Oh, man. What a broad question. So I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I've been here 20 years this year. I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I am a middle child, the second of 4 daughters. That was probably a significant thing. I love my sisters. They're all still in Michigan, so I don't get to see them as much as I'd like. But my family has been a big part of my life, even though I live 6 hours away. I think I would like to talk about, let's see, there's just so many things to say about. I am a lover of life. I love to practice delight. I think we're going to talk some more about that a little bit later. But I'm a person who wants to get the most out of life. So I'm an Enneagram 7. I enjoy joy and pleasure and adventure. And I just have like a zest for doing all the things. And so I try to do that as much as possible. I am married to a wonderful gem of a man named David. We've been together since 2020. We got married 2.5 years ago. And he's one of the greatest joys and delights of my life. I very much appreciate him. And I'm an amateur photographer. I love taking pictures of things that are beautiful. I find myself drawn to light, chasing light around, and particularly trees and the city. It's gorgeous. If you haven't been to Pittsburgh, you should come check us out. It's really
Absolutely. I
America's
love
most
it.
livable city.
Yes. I
Yeah.
love it when, even though Reagan and I have lived here 17 years, because I love the city so much and share so many positive things about the city, people think that we're from here. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, I'll wear that with a badge of honor.
Yeah.
I don't know if,
Yes.
how many years, as a transplant to Pittsburgh that it takes to get your quote unquote Yinzer card, but
I don't know. I
I don't know
think
if
we've
you've got an
got it.
opinion on that, but
Well, people tend to think when I say now I've been here 20 years, they're like, all right, you're good. So,
okay.
yeah. So
20
I think,
years. Well, we're
yeah, you're
almost there.
close. Yeah. I'm going to
Yeah.
give it to you. I mean, I'm
Okay.
in, so I'd be happy to extend the membership further.
Nice. Well, I know thanks for sharing all of that. That's a great recap on who you are as a leader and a woman. I think one of the things that, I've learned from you that is important to you is that you love coaching others, specifically empowering women. Like,
Yes.
think about your educational experience for a moment. And if you could share with our listeners how some of those passions came to be and maybe some of the themes that you learned in your journey.
Yeah. So I studied communication, psychology, and gender studies in my undergrad work in Michigan. And I cared about women and I was angry about the patriarchy when I was 12 years old. I remember getting in fights with the boys in my class
Yes.
about
Yes.
things as a child, and I'm still mad about it. It is
Mm-hmm.
one of my passions in life to figure out how to empower women to bring more equity and equality to everyone, since the
Love it.
patriarchy hurts men as well. It's a big deal. So I would like to see people, but particularly women, come into their full fruition and fullness.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are some things I learned about my undergrad. Then I went to get a master's degree in higher education right after college. And I worked then with college students for a really long time in campus ministry, and love that time of life where people are figuring out who they are, what they're going to be about.
Mm-hmm.
And I just really enjoy investing in people at that time of their life, where they're trying to understand that stuff. And if you can get a good sense of who you are and what you want to be about early in life, like, you're
Right.
going to do much better instead of the flailing that most of us end up doing for a good portion of that season.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was exposed to a lot of leadership development in the early part of my career. I was blessed to be invested in by a lot of people, invited into training opportunities and things like that. And once I was part of this cohort and they brought in a leadership consulting organization to do some training with us, and I was
Mm-hmm.
like, hold on a second, that's a job. I could do
Right.
that. And
Uh-huh.
it was so interesting to me just to help people figure out how to lead better. I think we have a leadership crisis in our country, in our world. It's very important. And a lot of leaders don't really get much training. They get promoted to the next level because they were good at their job. And it turns out that leading other people doing that job is a very different role, and they don't have the support and training to do it well. And so they end up struggling with things and recognizing the ways that their shadow sides, their weaknesses, are getting in the way of their success and their capacity and their effectiveness. So I really love helping people see themselves better. I do a lot of assessment coaching in my work. So I walk people through their Clifton Strengths results, their Enneagram. I use a few other assessments, the M Code, the MPACT, the DISC, things like that, that help people see who they are, how they're wired, and that it's not a character flaw, that you don't have all the strengths, that you're not meant to,
Right.
but who are you and how can you lead more out of that, and watch out for the things that are getting in your way, so that the wake that you're leaving behind you is leaving flourishing and empowerment for other people, instead of just trying to prop up your own power and authority, which isn't
Right.
a cute look, and it's not effective. So I really love doing that. I see myself I describe my work to people often as like I'm a flashlight, and we're going into a dark cave of stuff that you don't know about yourself or about your situation. A lot of times people feel stuck or lost, and I can help them shed some light on what's going on here.
Yeah.
So we can look at the map of themselves, who they are, how they're wired, and also start to look for some options for ways out of the situation they're in. So they have it all already. They just don't necessarily know it's there. And it helps to have somebody walk with you and figure it out. So that's what I do.
Man, I love that. Thanks for explaining that. Like,
Yeah.
I'm definitely an assessment nerd,
Mm.
and you
Hmm.
take it to a new level. And so, like, I promise our listeners, this is a podcast about amplifying voices of perseverance, and we're going to get to it in a moment. But I have to be curious and ask a few questions about your coaching.
Sure.
One, here's a question out of curiosity that just came to mind. For those that you coach, your clients that you see the most growth in,
Hmm.
are there any common denominators that you're like, here's some characteristics
Mm.
that, they're thriving in or things that they're leaning into? But
Hmm.
what are some of those common bonds among people that you see that you're coaching that end up growing in their leadership?
Yeah. My favorite quality is somebody who wants to be there, somebody who's like seeking it out because they
Mm,
want to get better. I don't usually enjoy working with people who are assigned to me for
too, yeah.
some sort of performance improvement plan. I can do that, and it does help, but I love when people are hungry and they're like, hey, I want to figure out how to be better at my job.
Uh-huh.
One of my strengths is maximizer, and so I like to work with the
Nice.
best of the best.
Yes.
And usually the best are people who recognize that there's always room to grow. So I
Mm,
enjoy working with those people. Some degree of self-awareness often helps, some
hmm
humility to recognize that there might be ways that they're ineffective or that they could do something better and they want help. And that's usually a fun person to work with.
I love that. I
Hmm.
remember like back in the day, doing Myers-Briggs and then, stumbling into, Strength Finder and then the Enneagram and was like, where has this been my whole life?
Hmm.
Um, I'm sure that you have different reasons for using each of them, but do you have like a favorite assessment or one that you
The
really enjoy
Enneagram.
using the most and why?
Enneagram is my favorite by far. It is just so complex and comprehensive. The others definitely are huge gifts, and maybe those are even maybe better starting points if like self-awareness is a totally new thing. But the Enneagram, it's so has so many layers, so many ways of looking at yourself and the relationship dynamics between you and other people, the way you approach change, the way that you deal with conflict. I mean, it just has so much insight. And so that's my favorite.
We could probably do a whole podcast season on how
Mm.
the 9 types respond to conflict and trauma and
Hmm.
persevere and stuff like that.
Yeah,
That'd be a fascinating conversation.
that would be.
Well, obviously we talked a little bit earlier about how we both live in Pittsburgh. Before we
Hmm.
get into your, story of perseverance here, what do you love most about our city?
Mm. Well, we did win Most Livable City a number of years ago, and I totally agree with
Yes.
that. I think, Pittsburgh is kind of a big city amenities with a small city feel. There used to
Mm-hmm.
be a lot more people here before the steel industry pulled out. But so we still have all the stuff. Like last night, I got to go see Hamilton. It was amazing.
Oh,
Like Broadway shows have
man.
come here. We've got an opera, we've got a ballet, we've got amazing museums and a really great library system and all kinds of really great stuff that a city of our size is kind of surprising that we would have all of that stuff. But we do.
Mm-hmm.
And there aren't that many people here. And so it's still like a great cost of living. It feels like a city that's the right size for me, for my preferences, where I feel like I can have really good community and feel known and like
Mm.
not just kind of one lost ant in the middle of some like huge
Right.
metropolis.
Right.
But also it's not so small that it feels like high school, where you're just like,
Right.
ugh, everybody's in everybody's business. Like it just,
Mm-hmm.
you can be a little bit anonymous, but also safe and known. So I just enjoy that part about the
Yeah,
city. And it's also beautiful. You should come see our rivers. It's really the city of bridges. We have more bridges than Venice. Did you know?
that is a fact.
It
That
is
is
a
a fact.
fact.
Yeah.
Yep.
I, I've met so many folks that are impacted like in their healthcare journey that have come to Pittsburgh with kind of
Hmm.
preconceived notions of what the
Yeah.
city is about. And then they get here and there's several guests on this season of the podcast even that are on the journey of transplant with their child. And Pittsburgh is starting to become an abdominal like pediatric transplant capital of the world.
Mm.
And there's so many families coming here.
Yeah.
And once they get here and they're getting great health care and their child is stable and they look around and maybe do a couple excursions in the city, they're like, oh my goodness, like, where's this steel town at? I expected to
Yeah.
walk out of the hospital and step into soot. And it's like they have
Right.
this vision of Pittsburgh that is no
Well,
longer what it is now with all the education and
yeah.
medicine and so many great things that
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
can't echo what you said more.
Yeah. Oh, they used to call it hell with the lid blown off, I think. I'm
Yep.
not kidding. Like,
No,
that was
I've
bad.
heard
So,
that.
yeah.
Yep.
But it's not that anymore. We've
It's
cleaned
not.
up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, we love our city, and if you're listening and you're not from Pittsburgh or have never been to Pittsburgh, you should check it out. But let's take a moment to dive into Katherine Sikma Wadsworth's specific story of perseverance. I have a lot of respect for you, Katherine, as a human being, and I feel like we can learn a lot from your specific diagnosis
Hmm.
and maybe how you persevered or pressed on through that. So, can you share a little bit about that story and walk us through that diagnosis and what treatment looked like for you in those early days?
Yeah, sure. So when I was 34 in the early summer of 2017, I felt a lump in my breast. And
Mm,
that was strange. And it hurt. And that was also strange and concerning to me. And so, but I really hoped that it was nothing. I was like, I'm 34, no big deal. This will go away. Sometimes you get
mm,
aches and pains, everything's fine. So I put it off for a little bit, but it didn't go away. So I went to the doctor and they said, You're 34. This is probably mastitis, even though I'm not breastfeeding, which seemed strange to me at the time. They
mm,
put me on an antibiotic and sent me home. And surprising no one, that did not work. And so I went back to the doctor and ended up getting some diagnostic imaging. My first mammogram, because I was by that point 35 years old. They
mm,
don't recommend that yet. Or now I think they've changed the guidance to 35, but I had never gone before. And they discovered that I did have cancer. It was
mm,
ductal carcinoma in situ, DCIS, the common
mm,
name for it. And during that series of time there, we also did some genetic testing. I do have some family history of breast cancer, and it turns out I have a genetic mutation that predisposed me to breast cancer and a few others. It's
mm,
not the scary BRCA one that a lot of women have in their families, but it was another one that was a significant risk. And so my doctors suggested, and I agreed, that the best course of treatment for me would be to go ahead with a double mastectomy. And so that was obviously a huge decision. It's a pretty big, significant surgery.
mhm,
And afterwards, the tissue came back and it showed that it was, there was signs of microinvasion, meaning that it might be spreading beyond the initial site.
mm,
And there was no lymph node involvement, which is really good news. But they said because of the type of cancer that I had, it was triple negative,
mm,
which sounds good but isn't. There are 3 different hormones that impact breast cancer: estrogen, progesterone, and one called HER2/neu.
mm.
And so if it's receptive to those, they can treat it with hormones. But mine was triple negative, meaning no receptors for those. And so therefore I had to do like the high octane chemo. So super
Wow.
serious one. So I did 12 rounds of chemo, no, I'm sorry, 16 rounds, 12 rounds of one called AC, adriamycin, and Cytoxan, and then 12 rounds of Taxol. So that was a 6-month journey
Wow.
through chemotherapy. And it's like, it's the bad one where you lose your hair and the nausea and all the
Mm,
things. It's incredibly bad for you. It's the kind where they bring you, the nurses administer it wearing hazmat suits. You're like,
wow.
you're going to put that in my body. But,
Mhm.
that's what works for this kind
Yeah.
of tumor. And it was effective. After that season of 6 months of chemotherapy, then I had to have 3 more reconstructive surgeries. And so all in all, it went from my initial diagnosis in August 2017 until I finished my last surgery just after Thanksgiving in 2018. So a little over a year
Wow. Wow.
long. Yeah.
That's a long journey. And
Hmm.
maybe I appreciate you sharing that. I'm sure that there's some listeners out there that know that gut punch feeling when you
Hmm.
hear the C word.
Yeah.
Could you describe your emotions like in those moments, maybe the days and weeks after you heard the word cancer?
Hmm.
What were you thinking? What were you feeling? What was
Yeah.
that like for you during that time?
Yeah. I mean, it's terrifying, right? Like that's what nobody wants to hear. I remember laying on the table in the radiologist's office right after they did the ultrasound, and I was waiting for the radiologist to come in and tell me about the results. And I remember thinking, like, is this the last moment where I don't have cancer?
Hmm. Wow.
And then she came in, and that's what she said. And it was terrifying. It's really scary. It felt like the rug got pulled out from under me. I mean, I was young. 35 years old is not when you expect to get a diagnosis like that. I know a lot of your listeners are dealing with pediatric cancers, and it's like, yeah, you don't think a child is going to have this kind of thing. I didn't think I would have that either. And so it was very scary, really disorienting, just shock. And also, to some extent, I remember feeling actually a little bit of degree of relief because I knew there was something wrong. There's something going on in my body. And it was like, it's not antibiotics, something like
Right.
that's not going to fix it here. Like there's something wrong. So there was some degree of like, okay, we know what it is. I don't know what's going to happen. This is really scary. But I felt like having a name for what was happening was helpful to me. And also I did feel, for as like scary and isolating as it was, I also felt supported. The radiologist actually cried when she told me that's what it was. And, or that's what she thought it was. They needed to wait for a biopsy to be sure. But yeah, so that's kind of how I felt. It was like all the emotions, every single thing, scary, anxiety, fear, and anger, sadness. Yeah.
For the general public or someone that hasn't been in that situation, what are some of the things that you think through, that you experience in those early days when you hear the diagnosis, you have cancer, that maybe, God forbid, the regular person hasn't experienced, that would help them understand a little bit of what's going on in that specific, scenario?
You mean for people who aren't getting the diagnosis, but they know
they
someone?
know of someone that has received the diagnosis, maybe that they could never completely understand, but give them a little feel for what that's like.
Yeah. It's very disorienting. It is, I mean, it like stops your whole world. Like all of a sudden, whatever you plan to do tomorrow is no longer happening. And this is what we're doing now. So it changes your whole life. It's very frightening because you think what's going to happen. Next week you've made plans for the next year. You're going to work and you're going to do this, and all of a sudden none of that is happening. It really does impact everything. There are people, I think, who try to make you feel better, like, well, at least XYZ, like at least it's not, at least you don't have the BRCA, at least this, at least that. Like there's no at least. It's bad, and you don't need to try to make the person feel better about it. Like what's actually helpful is to allow them to feel how they feel about it. That's and good. To just hold space for them to go through whatever emotion they're having at the moment. You don't really need to say anything. You can just be there and say, like, I hear you. I can't imagine how you feel. I don't know. You can tell me if you would like to tell me about it, or I'll just sit here with you. We can just be quiet. That's okay. That's really all people need in that first little bit where it's just getting used to their new reality that they're facing.
I appreciate you sharing that, and hopefully that's a word of insight and encouragement for our listeners.
Friends, I'm Reagan Reeder, co-founder of Pressing On, and I love providing leadership to the organization as we uplift, resource, and coach hospitalized families, many of whom are on the journey of pediatric transplant. This season of the Pressing On podcast is sponsored by our friends at CODA, the Children's Organ Transplant Association. You can look them up online at coda.org. CODA helps children and young adults who need a life-saving transplant by providing fundraising assistance and family support. They're the trusted leader in supporting transplant families financially for a lifetime. CODA has helped raise more than $125 million for transplant-related expenses since 1986 and have seen approximately 2,400 CODA patients transplanted successfully. CODA is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, so funds raised to help meet the needs of transplant patients are not considered income for families, and CODA's services are provided at no charge to transplant families. As the mom of a transplant recipient, I'd highly recommend their services because I've seen firsthand how CODA's compassionate care and financial guidance has helped our family since my daughter's transplant, before, during, and after her transplant in 2017. For more information on how COTA might assist your family financially on the transplant journey, head to COTA.org. That's COTA.org.
The theme of perseverance is heavy when you talk about initial diagnosis and all of these rounds of chemo and treatment and reconstructive surgeries. What did you learn about perseverance, and how did you persevere day after day, week after week? Maybe share some helpful things for our audience of what that looked like for you. Like, how did you make it through that period of your life?
Yeah, I was really, really blessed and lucky to have a lot of help. My family took turns dropping everything and coming out to stay with me. I was single at the time, living in my own place by myself. And all of a sudden I couldn't do anything. Like literally after the surgery, I couldn't lift anything more than 5 pounds or raise my arms over my head or like open a pill bottle. I mean, it was like extremely limiting. So I needed help with every single thing. And so they took turns coming out to be what we called my watcher, who's going to watch me. So they would come in, stay with me. I had to have a lot of support, and I had friends and family members and people from the church and the community who showed up and brought me stuff I needed, because I really needed to learn how to depend on other people for everything. And I'd been pretty independent beforehand, living alone.
I was going to ask if that was hard for you to do.
It was so hard, so hard to all of a sudden be like, I literally can't open this bottle of pills. Like, I can't go grocery shopping, can't drive myself. I can't do anything. It would have been very easy, I think, to fall right into like the pit of despair. And there definitely were times when I felt that way. Though I would say for me, like in the middle of that, I tried, like, perseverance at that point, I think meant just like, okay, well, we're just going to accept what's happening. We have no other choice. It's not like you can say, no, thank you, pass.
Right.
I'm not, you have to. So just like, all right, let's just do the next thing. And then we'll do the next thing. And then we'll do the next thing. And if today means all I can do is sleep, then that's what I'll do. And I'm trying to let go of some of the judgments that I feel about like what I used to be able to do for myself. And now I need to ask for help to change my dressings and fix my drains. And there's a lot of vulnerability that's required at that time. And it was very difficult. And you don't get a choice. Like people would say, like, oh, you're so brave. It's like, well, thank you. I mean, what was my other option?
Right.
I didn't get a menu. I just have to keep doing it. And so, yeah, just keep living, breathing one day at a time. That's really all you can do.
Well, I know that one of the important themes for us as an organization is helping individuals and families recognize that we're holistic people with many different parts, physical, emotional, spiritual, relational, intellectual. Like when you think of those parts of who you are, as a woman, as a leader, as someone who's persevering through, the fight with cancer, was there maybe one of those parts that you paid close attention to and leaned into and really nourished during your fight? And then was there maybe another one of those parts that you're like, I could have paid better attention to this? Does anything come to mind?
Yes, it does. I would say physically, I think I did a pretty good job at that time. So like and it's things that, they're required, but sometimes people have trouble doing them, like going to the doctor's appointments, taking the pills, like going to sleep when you need to. Like I'm a night owl. I'm used to going out. Like I was at a very active social life. This is all pre-COVID too. So I would do all the things, and all of a sudden I had to do none of the things and just stay at my house and be in bed at 9:30, and which is funnily enough now much closer to my regular bedtime. But then it felt like just insane. But that's what my body needed. So I was trying to learn how to befriend my body at the time. And I guess I want to say more about that in a little bit, if we could come back to that.
Yeah, I was going to say more about that.
Yeah, I do want to say more about that, but I want to answer the rest of your first question first. The other part that I would say I both did pay attention to and also completely ignored is my emotional self. I received a lot of very good advice to try to keep my spirits up, right? Like it's very easy again to fall into the pit of despair. And so what could you do to hang on to some hope in the midst of this. So they would say, find some lighthearted things to do with your life, like read light books, watch comedies, play games, just try to keep your spirits up because that actually really does help your body heal. So it's important. So I was like, all right, I can do that. But the flip side of that then was that I did not make space for the other stuff that was definitely present, like those harder emotions, acknowledging the deep anxiety that I was having, my fear of death, my frustration with the limitation I was experiencing, the anger, some of the anger I was having at my body, at life, like how unfair it felt, and at God. Would say, in the Christian scriptures, it says, I'm going to watch over you and no harm shall come to you. And the hairs on your head are counted. And I was like, that doesn't help me while I'm watching them go down the drain. Like,
Wow.
It doesn't help me that you're just watching. Like I don't feel safe. I don't feel protected. So I was very angry about some of that stuff, but I didn't allow myself a lot of space to sit with that. And part of that's my natural tendency as an Enneagram 7. We prefer the upper echelon of emotion and tend to steer clear of those darker, harder emotions. But I think at the time, maybe that's all I could do. You just have to get through it. And then later you can process more. So I try not to beat myself up about that too much at this point.
Yeah.
But I remember a moment where a friend of mine came over and was sitting with me on the porch and we were talking about something that was difficult with the treatment. And I was starting to feel teary and upset. And then I remember saying let's play a game, just shut it down. I cannot go there right now. And I think all of humanity, we do that at our peril, right? Like if you can't feel, Brene Brown says you can't selectively numb emotions. So when we decide not to feel the hard stuff, we're also limiting our capacity to really experience the good stuff.
That's
and
good.
So I think, at the time, maybe that's all I could do. But when I think about now in retrospect, I had a party right before my double mastectomy where my friends came and hopefully this is okay for your listeners, but we called it Ta-Ta to the Tatas. And we had they made me a cake that said, thanks for the mammaries.
Oh my
goodness.
And
we did a karaoke party at this private karaoke place where we sang songs like End of the Road and Bye, Bye, Bye and stuff like that. It was kind of a lighthearted way of engaging with what was happening. And that was helpful to me because it brought people around and it was supportive. But also making light of something that was a really hard, tragic thing that was happening in my life. And I didn't know how to really go there at that point.
Yeah. I really appreciate you being vulnerable and transparent with that. I know that that's going to resonate with someone. So thanks for sharing that part of your story. You talked about, the party that they threw for you. You talked about how you had your watchers.
Yeah.
Maybe can you share one or two more specific things that were that was really helpful while I was going through, what I was going through. I'm curious because I think a lot of people find different things helpful, and I'd love to know maybe a few of your top helpful things that people did for you while you were battling.
Yeah, it's so hard to even narrow it down because people did every single thing for me, which was so incredibly such a gift. My mom made me chemo presents. Every time I finished a treatment, I got to come home and have a present. So that was nice. They were very thoughtful, themed gifts. And my sisters did that as well. My niece, who was, I don't know how old was she at the time, 6 maybe, she gave me her rainbow Build-A-Bear that I could keep and take to my chemotherapy treatments. And all the doctors and nurses thought it was super cute. And it was this treasure of hers that she had given me to make me feel better. She gave me her favorite Barbie dolls. And it just was so unbelievably thoughtful and generous of her little heart. So there were a lot of things like that. I had a friend who organized a meal train and a t-shirt drive, or not t-shirt drive. We designed a t-shirt and sold it to raise money to pay for a wig. Natural hair wigs are very expensive. And that was a part of it that, it's just hair. It doesn't matter, but it really mattered. It felt I didn't recognize myself. And that felt like a huge part of my identity in a way that was just gone. And so I wanted to be able to like at least recognize myself in the mirror. And so to get a wig that was like, my hair was like this before.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was expensive to get something that would match it. And so they did a big fundraiser to help me pay for that. Bringing meals, just sending texts and cards. I got so many cards in the mail and I hung them up on the walls all around my bedroom. So I was literally like sleeping in this, like being surrounded by the love and support from my friends. But it was like my favorite thing when the mail came every day, because there was just like the world stopped. I just sit here in my living room, but then people would send stuff in the mail. And that was really thoughtful. Just texts, cards, notes, things like that. It was great.
That's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that. Hopefully that's a wise word, and maybe as a listener you pick up on one of those things that Katherine shared and are able to do that for someone you know that is battling through their healthcare fight. I'd love it if you'd be willing to revisit that statement about befriending your body. I definitely don't want to lose that. I think that you had some wise words to share on that as well.
Yeah, that was something that was really difficult. And it's been a journey since then. But I felt like when I was diagnosed with cancer that my body had turned on me. And I felt like angry at my body. Like, why are you doing this to me? And it was very frustrating. And some of the symptoms I was having with chemotherapy and stuff, I just like didn't feel comfortable ever. Like I felt sick and gross a lot of the time. And it was easy for me to kind of feel like I was at odds with my body. And instead, to try to get to this point, like through therapy and healing afterwards, that I could feel like I was on the same side as my body again, that even some of the ways that it was reacting to the chemo were it trying to heal itself and help me, that it was also attacked by the cancer. Like it wasn't doing it to me, that it was something that was happening to it too. So to feel like I could make friends with my body again so we could trust each other. And when it would give me signals like something's wrong, that I, rather than ignoring it or hoping it would go away, that I would pay attention and listen to it and go to the doctor and get it checked and advocate for myself, and to help it quell some of its anxiety that I wasn't paying attention to it, or that I was going to ignore it or something, like to form that level of trust again with my body, and figure out ways to care for it and support it through that journey. And then through everything else, like this is my home. This is the only place I'll ever get to live. And I want it to be safe, and I want to feel good in it and not feel like we're competing with each other, but that we really are on the same page. And so that has been a big journey through my therapy to figure out how to trust my body again and to support it.
Man, I really appreciate you sharing that. One of the things that Reagan and I talk about a lot is the individual like importance of analyzing our psyche and going to therapy, before, during, and after trauma. I know as an Enneagram 3, like I was pushing through things, when we spent a lot of time in the hospital, fighting through things. And until I really took the time to get alone, do the deep dive, go inward, I learned so much about myself. So when you say the word therapy in the midst of that, befriending your body challenge, like I just encourage anybody listening right now, whether you feel like you've been through a lot of trauma or not, it is so, so helpful to pursue therapy.
Yes.
There's not a family that I have run into in a battle with cancer, in the hospital, seeing their child suffer, anything like that, that has regretted going and talking with someone. So highly recommend that as well. I appreciate you bringing that up. And one of the things that, go ahead.
I just want to say there's like multiple kinds of therapy too. Like there's the regular talk therapy, cognitive behavioral stuff where you tell somebody what you're thinking and they help you process your emotions. But also there's other stuff that's been super helpful with trauma that I've done a bit. EMDR, it's this eye movement something. I can't remember what the rest of the acronym is, but it helps to process traumatic emotion. And that has been super helpful. I've done a lot of somatic work where I'm just starting to listen to like when I say I feel anxious, like where do I feel anxious? What does anxious feel like in my body? I
Yes.
feel tightness in my throat and like flutters in my chest and like what is happening. So it helps to be able to identify those things. So the somatic practice has been really good. And also I just had another one and then it went out of my head. Oh yeah, I did some art therapy, which was
Ooh.
super helpful, and like looking at what came out from that. I really, really enjoyed and appreciate. Well, and it was kind of hard actually, but I got a lot out of it. So yeah, if you're thinking about like processing trauma and you're not a person who feels immediately comfortable just going and being like, here's all my deepest, darkest, like there are other ways you can start to approach that can be super helpful.
Yeah, that's great. So one of the things that I love about you is like in this journey of perseverance, you're teaching others, you're sharing with others, you're coaching others. And I just feel like it's a beautiful thing to see all of that coming alive, not only in your growth, but benefiting dozens and dozens and
Mm.
dozens of other people and leaders and people in our community of faith. And um, you've also started a podcast.
I
And
have.
so
Mm-hmm.
like I'd love to hear how the initial idea of the You Gotta Try This podcast came about.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess it first started, people used to tell me I should start a podcast. They were like, I like the way your voice sounds. I would like to listen to you. And I have a lot of recorded sermons and stuff from our
Sure.
church. I preach there a lot. But I was like, I don't know. What do I talk about? Like, I don't have anything that I want to talk about all the time on the air. So I just kind of put it in the back of my head. And then I was at my friend's birthday party and she introduced me to her friends and said, this is Catherine. She always tells me about things and I try them and I love them. So if she tells you to do anything, you should do it. And I was like, ooh, hold on there. That is what I
Mm-hmm.
love to do. I
Yep.
really enjoy sharing things I love with people I love. There's so many good, beautiful, amazing things in the world that have helped me, and I want to share them with people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm doing it constantly, all the time. I'm a great evangelist for things that I love. And so
Yes.
I decided that would be a great umbrella that I could put over like a whole bunch of stuff. So it's different every week, but I get to share things with people that I really enjoy. So that's what I do.
I love it. Reagan and I think of you often when we're thinking about the term delighting, in
Yes.
different things. So
Hmm.
maybe share with our audience a little bit about how practicing delight has become a
Hmm.
habit of yours.
Yeah. So that's a major theme of the podcast. Every single week, I share something that is bringing me delight, and I ask my guests to do the same. I've done 2 full episodes on that as well. That came out of, I was away for the weekend with my best friend, and we were talking. It was shortly before I turned 40, and she said, what do you want to accomplish by the time you turn 40? And I was like, blah, I hate that question. I don't care about that. And I think post cancer, my answers to everything have just completely changed. That
Hmm.
I want to feel like I love my life. There's not. I don't want there to be a day that goes by that I didn't enjoy, that I didn't spend for good things. I don't want it to just be a grind that I got to get through and just have some. I don't know. It just changed the way that I think about things.
Hmm.
I got a Snapple top one time that said, you should never regret getting older. It's a privilege denied to many. And
Mm.
that was actually before I got sick, but that stuck with me. And I don't want to waste my life. I want to enjoy my life. So, like, what do I want to accomplish by the time I'm 40? Blah. What do I want to love by the time I'm 40? What do I want to enjoy?
Yes.
And so, while we were together, we actually created a menu of delights,
Hmm.
things I could choose from on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes they're tiny little small things like blowing bubbles,
Hmm.
going to see beautiful things outside, flowers, trees, etc. Really good coffee. And then there's bigger stuff like huge trips that are like bucket list kind of stuff that I want to enjoy, and everything in between. But I
Mm-hmm.
want to love my life, and I want to invite
Mm.
other people to love their lives. There's somebody, now I can't remember what the name of the podcast is. Sorry, whoever said this. But it said that we're at the end of our lives, we're only going to remember the things that we experienced, and we're only going to experience the things that we pay attention to. And
Mm.
so where you go with your attention, like that's something you can direct. And if you pay attention to something, then it sticks, and that's part of your life. And if you don't, you missed it. And so I want to practice experiencing delight and finding these things that are just moments of levity and joy and whimsy. And so that's what I do
I
all the
love that.
time. I love it too.
Well, let me encourage all of our listeners to go check out the You Gotta Try This podcast. Katherine, just let them know real briefly how they can follow along and how they can find it.
Yeah, sure. So it's everywhere podcasts are found. You can
Wonderful.
get it on Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever. And you can also follow on Instagram at You Gotta Try This Podcast.
Wonderful.
Yeah, we'd love to have you.
Hey everyone, I'm Olivia Reeder, and I love helping my parents serve hospitalized families through our Pressing On programs. Here at Pressing On, we're committed to meeting tangible needs, and we have various programs that help resource hospitalized families physically, emotionally, and spiritually, including our Hospital Care Package program, Transplant Backpack program, Gas Card program, Crisis Coaching program, and Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh program. So if you or a family you know is affected by a long-term hospitalization or is on the journey of pediatric transplant, we'd love to come alongside you with free resources during this time. Let me encourage you to visit our website at pressingon.org to sign up for our free resources or make a referral to one of our programs. Visit pressingon.org today. Thanks so much.
Well, if you're up for it, we love to get to know our guests with a rapid fire round of sorts with several fun questions to get to know you as a human being. If you're up for it, I've got several for you.
I'm up for it.
Awesome.
Okay.
Here we go. First question. What piece of artwork do you most appreciate and why?
This is an incredibly hard question. I actually talked to my husband about it for a good half an hour last night.
Oh, wow.
First of all, he's an artist, so
Yes.
I feel like obviously I love his artwork so much. He's an impressionist. DavidWadsworthArtwork.com if you want to go see.
Boom. Awesome stuff.
A couple of my favorites of his, which I almost don't want to say because I don't want anyone to buy them. I want to keep displaying
You
them in
wanna
my
keep
own
them.
home. Yeah. But my two favorites of his are Independence Day and Northern Sky. Love them both. But then the other thing, so he's an artist, I'm a photographer. We love doing that kind of stuff together. And last year we got to go to Italy and see all the art. And it was like, we were just scrolling through all these photos that we saw. And I was like, how do you pick with these things? And I had a really hard time. And I eventually settled on the Sistine Chapel ceiling, which feels like, I was like, you can't say that. That's so cliche. But I'll tell you why I love it.
Okay.
A couple things. It's, first of all, obviously everyone knows it's incredible, but like the technique that he used to mix the paint with the plaster as he went, and to be able to do it standing right next to it and then have it be like at scale from the floor. It's just crazy. But this I didn't know. On the ceiling, there's all these depictions of prophets, I think like Jeremiah, Daniel, whoever. But then there's also Sibyls, they're called, all these women who are up there.
Huh.
And in that time, he was depicting them as these really, in fact, if you look at them, they look kind of mannish. They're incredibly muscular.
Huh.
And he's depicting them as heroines of the faith, these strong, powerful women. And my feminist heart just thrums with crazy pride. It makes me really happy to see.
I love it.
But so often we don't see that kind of stuff in art. It's women are oh, just loose and whatever, and they're super strong and heroines. That made me really happy. So I'm gonna pause.
That's
there.
awesome.
There's lots more to say, but I didn't know that, and it's amazing.
We could do another podcast episode on Katherine's take on all the things in the art world.
I have so many thoughts.
Second rapid fire question: your favorite movie of all time?
Little Women, Greta Gerwig's version.
Love it.
For many of the similar reasons. I resonate a lot with Jo March, and I could talk about that for a long time, but in the spirit of rapid fire, I'll say just go watch it.
That's awesome. If you could share a meal with anyone in the world, who would it be and why?
I chose to believe that I could answer this question with someone who's no longer with us.
Yeah, go for it.
I picked my grandma. She died in 2000, it's almost 25 years ago. And I just really would have liked to get to know her as an adult. Yeah.
Man, those people are precious. Last one, a little bit more serious. What does the word perseverance mean to you?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. There's a lot of things I could say about that too. I think just to keep going, but with holding on to some hope. that it's not going to be like this forever, and to be gentle with yourself. I guess it's more of advice to somebody in the midst of a situation like this, where it doesn't mean you have to be like storming the castle perseverance, but like to just do what's next, to be gentle and to be honest about how it is. It doesn't mean that you're not brave. In fact, I don't think you can be brave unless you're scared. It's okay to be that, and you can just keep going. I think the important thing is to not lose hope that something could be different, that there's still some goodness left. And I know that gets even harder, like with terminal diagnoses and things like that. I was blessed to be able to see a light on the other end of the tunnel. I know that's not always the case, but through walking with friends all the way to the end, there's still perseverance required there. And I think there's still goodness left all the way to the last day. And it's worth showing up for.
Wow. That's beautiful. I just kind of want to sit with that for a little bit. Well, in closing, Katherine, you've shared a lot of inspiring and encouraging words with us. I'm curious if there's a specific book or article or resource or podcast, something that's been meaningful to you in your journey that you might want to recommend to others that are battling as well.
Yes. Somebody gave me a book called Just Get Me Through This. It's specifically about breast cancer and that journey. And it has really, really helpful, very practical advice. And it got me through a lot of really good stuff. So that was super helpful. I've bought that for everybody I've known. Sadly, a lot of people who have been diagnosed with this since I was in my life. So that's a great book. I also read one that's called Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved, which is great. That was very helpful to me. It was written by a woman who's in stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and the things people would say to her and how she responded. And it was great. So it's a memoir. Check that one out. The last thing I wanted to say is a diagram that I found once, and I wonder if we can find a link to it and you can put it in the show notes.
Sure.
But it was super helpful, and it has been helpful for me with walking alongside other people who are going through things like this since. But the idea is that the person in the middle of the situation, that's like who it's happening to. So like if you're the one who got diagnosed, that's you. If it's your child, that's them. And then in the next circle is the people who are most impacted by that. So that could be, if it's the child's parents, the person's immediate family, spouse, kids, whatever, like that next immediate circle. And then the next ring out is, their friends and family who are a little further out. People from their tennis club, whatever, would be in the next circle. So it's like concentric rings. And the idea is that when you are talking to somebody who's going through these things, that you should always do care inward. So you just support people who are further in than you. And when you need support, because of course the thing is impacting you as well, you're having your own emotional reaction to it, that you would go to a person who's outside, like further out than you, to get that support. So basically that you don't call the person who's going through the horrible thing and be like, I'm having such a hard time with this diagnosis. Because you are, and that totally makes sense, but they can't hold space for that. They need to deal with their own experience of it. And so you need support as well, but you need to find that from somebody who's further out on the circle than you are. So that was just a super helpful framework to have in walking through this, myself being the person in the middle and also walking with others who are closer in on a situation than I am.
That's a really important principle. Care in, receive support out. Katherine, this has been such a valuable conversation. I just want to say thanks for your wise teaching. Thanks for being a person of peace. Thanks for encouraging so many folks. I know that this conversation is going to be really, really inspiring to a lot of people. And so,
I hope so.
As we close, I'd love for them to be able to connect with you personally. So what's the best way for them to follow you and follow along with the podcast and all things Katherine Sikma Wadsworth these days?
Yeah. Well, you can find me on Instagram for the podcast at You Gotta Try This Podcast. I also have a photography page, K Sikma, Sikma photography. So you can follow those. If you actually know me, you can follow just me, K Sikma, Sikma. That's a private account just for my own people. But you can find me there if you're looking to connect for, something I talked about here and you want to know more. It's probably best to find me through those two avenues.
Wonderful.
Or LinkedIn. I'm there too.
Well, Katherine, I really appreciate all that you've shared today. Thanks for joining the Pressing On podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. And I love the work you guys do. I hope that this has been helpful to everybody. Thanks.
Well, hey, thanks so much for listening to the Pressing On podcast. If you found this episode inspiring and helpful in your journey of perseverance, we appreciate you sharing it with others. A great way to support our work of serving hospitalized families is sharing the podcast with family and friends, posting about it on social media, or leaving us a rating and review. Don't forget to visit our website at pressingon.org for our free programs and resources for hospitalized families. Follow along the Pressing On journey on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Pressing On PGH. As we all press on through healthcare challenges, we need to stick together. Until next time, know that you are not alone. You are seen, valued, and loved. Keep pressing on.